Sometimes the difference between dignity and humiliation is less than $5. On a cold Thursday evening in Columbus, Ohio, Grace Miller pulled her worn gray jacket tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out of the city bus carrying her 8-month-old son, Noah. The wind cut through the parking lot, and Noah let out a tired whimper from the stroller. Grace glanced down at him and forced a smile even though her heart felt heavier than it had in months. She had spent the entire day searching for work, visiting offices, stores, and warehouses within a 15-mile radius. Everywhere she went, the answer was the same. They would keep her application on file. They would call if something opened up. They appreciated her interest. None of those polite words could buy baby formula. None of them could stop Noah from getting hungry. Grace checked her wallet again as she approached the bright lights of the convenience store. 3 $1 bills. 4 quarters. 2 dimes. 3 pennies. $4.73. She already knew the number because she had counted it at least 20 times during the bus ride, but she checked again anyway, hoping reality might somehow change. Earlier that afternoon she had called the pediatric clinic. The nurse explained that Noah needed to stay on the same formula for now because switching suddenly might upset his stomach. Grace had 1 bottle left at home. 1. After that, she had nothing. The automatic doors slid open, and warm air greeted her face. She guided the stroller inside and headed straight toward the baby products aisle. Noah stared up at the ceiling lights while sucking on a pacifier. Grace grabbed the smallest container of formula she could find and turned it over to check the price tag. Her stomach dropped. $6.99. She stood frozen for several seconds. It wasn't a large amount of money for most people. For Grace, it might as well have been $600. She carefully searched the shelf for a smaller option, but there wasn't one. The store carried only that size. Grace swallowed hard and looked around. Customers pushed carts through the aisles, talking about dinner, plans, weekend trips, and everyday problems. Nobody noticed the young mother standing there trying to figure out how to feed her baby. She slowly walked toward the checkout counter. Maybe there was a discount she hadn't seen. Maybe the price would ring up differently. Maybe something good would happen for once. The cashier scanned the container and glanced at the screen. $6.99, she said. Grace handed over every dollar and every coin she had. The cashier counted the money and frowned. "You're short $2.26. Grace felt her face grow warm. "Could you hold it for just a few minutes? I have a friend I can call." The cashier hesitated before looking toward the manager's office. A middle-aged man wearing a store badge stepped out and walked over. His expression immediately hardened when he saw the situation. "What's the problem?" he asked. The cashier explained quietly. Grace straightened her shoulders. "I'm only a little short. If you can hold it, I can try to find someone to help." The manager looked at the formula container and then at Grace. "If you don't have the money, you can't buy it." Grace nodded. "I understand. I just need a few minutes." Instead of showing patience, the manager sighed loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. "Every week it's the same story. People come in expecting special treatment." Several shoppers turned their heads. Grace felt dozens of eyes drifting toward her. Her cheeks burned. "I'm not asking for special treatment," she said softly. "My son needs formula." Noah chose that exact moment to start crying. The sound echoed through the front of the store. Grace picked him up immediately and gently rocked him against her shoulder. The manager crossed his arms. "You need to leave if you can't complete the purchase." Grace's throat tightened. She looked down at her son and then at the container sitting on the counter. $2.26. That was all that stood between her baby and dinner. Yet at that moment, standing beneath the bright fluorescent lights while strangers watched in silence, it felt like the largest distance in the world. Grace lowered her eyes and carefully gathered the coins from the counter while Noah continued crying against her shoulder. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody said a word. The customers who had been watching quickly returned their attention to their own purchases as if nothing had happened. The manager pointed toward the entrance. You need to leave now. Grace nodded once. She was too exhausted to argue. She picked up the stroller with one hand, held Noah with the other, and slowly walked toward the automatic doors. The cold evening air hit her face the moment she stepped outside. The doors closed behind her with a quiet hiss, shutting out the warmth of the store. For a few seconds she simply stood there on the sidewalk, staring at the traffic moving through the intersection across the street. Noah's cries grew louder. Grace gently rubbed his back. I know, sweetheart, she whispered. I know. Her voice trembled despite her effort to stay calm. She pushed the stroller toward a bench near the edge of the parking lot and sat down. The temperature had already dropped below 40 degrees. The wind seemed stronger now. She adjusted Noah's blanket and kissed the top of his head. The little boy finally settled into soft whimpers, his blue eyes fixed on his mother. Grace forced another smile for him. It was the same smile she had used for months whenever life became difficult. The smile that said everything would be okay even when she was not sure it would. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. 5% battery remained. She opened her contacts and stared at the list. There were not many names. Her parents had passed away years earlier. Most of her college friends had moved away. The few people she still knew were struggling themselves. Still, she pressed call on the first number. No answer. She tried another. Straight to voicemail. A third call went unanswered. With each failed attempt, the knot in her chest tightened. Finally, she called her former coworker, Megan. The phone rang several times before someone answered. Relief flooded through Grace. Megan, hi. I am sorry to bother you. There was a brief pause. Grace, I am actually heading into work right now. Grace swallowed. I understand. I just wanted to ask if you could possibly lend me $3 until next week. Noah needs formula. Silence filled the line. Then Megan spoke softly. I wish I could help, but I am behind on my rent this month. Grace closed her eyes. It is okay. Thank you anyway. She ended the call before her emotions could spill over. Her phone battery dropped to 4%. Around her, people loaded groceries into sport utility vehicles and pickup trucks. Families laughed as they headed home for dinner. Grace was happy for them, yet she could not ignore the loneliness settling over her shoulders. A year earlier she had imagined a completely different future. She had been studying accounting while working part-time. She had plans, goals, stability. Then life had changed faster than she could prepare for. Now every day felt like a battle fought $1 at a time. Noah reached toward her face with a tiny hand. Grace took it gently. His fingers wrapped around hers. Despite everything, she smiled for real. You are worth every hard day, she whispered. Do not ever forget that. Just then a luxury black sedan rolled slowly into the parking lot and stopped several spaces away. Grace barely noticed. Cars came and went constantly. She focused on Noah instead. She did not see the man sitting in the back seat watching the store entrance. She did not notice that he had witnessed the entire scene inside. And she certainly did not know that the next few minutes were about to change both of their lives. Inside the black sedan, Ethan Caldwell sat quietly with a tablet resting on his lap. The 42-year-old businessman had spent most of the afternoon reviewing reports from a recent acquisition. The convenience store across the parking lot was part of a regional chain his company was in the final stages of purchasing. What was supposed to be a routine visit had turned into something entirely different. Through the large front windows, he had watched the interaction at the checkout counter from beginning to end. He had seen the young mother counting every coin. He had seen her embarrassment. Most importantly, he had seen the look in her eyes when she realized she could not afford the formula. Ethan had built a reputation as a disciplined executive who relied on numbers, data, and strategy. Yet there were moments when statistics became human faces. Tonight, that face belonged to Grace Miller. His driver glanced into the rearview mirror. Do you need anything, sir? Ethan looked toward the bench where Grace sat holding her son. How long have we been here? About 15 minutes. Ethan nodded. 15 minutes was long enough to know this was not someone creating a scene for attention. She had not argued. She had not demanded anything. She had simply left. That detail stayed with him. Across the parking lot, Grace adjusted Noah's blanket again. The baby had become quieter, but exhaustion showed on his small face. Ethan remembered his own childhood more clearly than most people realized. He had not been born into wealth. His father had worked long shifts repairing machinery, while his mother balanced 3 different jobs at various points. There had been months when every dollar mattered. He remembered overhearing conversations about overdue bills and empty refrigerators. Success had changed his circumstances, but it had never erased those memories. His phone vibrated. A senior executive from his company was calling. Ethan answered. "Everything finalized?" he asked. "Yes," the executive replied. "The acquisition documents are complete. Ownership officially transfers tomorrow morning." Ethan glanced toward the store entrance. "Interesting timing. Is there a problem?" the executive asked. Ethan considered the question for a moment. "There might be." After ending the call, he continued watching. Grace pulled out her phone again, frowned at the screen, and slipped it back into her purse. Dead battery, Ethan guessed. Then she looked toward the store one last time. There was disappointment in her expression, but not bitterness. That surprised him. Many people would have left angry. Grace simply looked tired. Finally, Ethan opened the car door and stepped out. The evening air carried a sharp chill, but he barely noticed. He walked across the parking lot at an unhurried pace. Grace looked up when she heard approaching footsteps. Instinctively, she sat a little straighter. Strangers rarely approached without a reason. Ethan stopped several feet away, careful not to invade her space. "Excuse me," he said. "I hope I am not bothering you." Grace offered a cautious smile. "No, it is okay." Ethan glanced toward Noah. "Beautiful little guy." Grace's expression softened immediately. "Thank you." Noah stared curiously at the tall stranger. Ethan smiled. "How old is he?" 8 months. Ethan nodded. "I saw what happened inside." Grace's shoulders stiffened. For a second, embarrassment returned to her face. "I would rather forget it." "I understand," Ethan replied gently. "But I do not think you did anything wrong." Grace looked away. "That does not really change the situation." Ethan appreciated the honesty. No self-pity. No attempt to gain sympathy. Just the truth. He looked toward the brightly lit store. "Would you mind if I asked you something?" Grace hesitated before answering. "What is that?" Ethan met her eyes. "If someone offered help, would you accept it?" Grace immediately shook her head. "Not if it is charity." The answer came so fast that Ethan almost smiled. It told him everything he needed to know about her character. He glanced back at the store entrance once more. Then he made a decision. "Good," he said calmly. "Because I am not interested in charity either." Grace stared at Ethan for several seconds, unsure how to respond. Most strangers either ignored her situation or offered sympathy that changed nothing. This man seemed different, but she could not yet explain why. Noah rested quietly against her shoulder, his small eyes moving between them. "What do you mean?" Grace finally asked. Ethan glanced toward the convenience store. "I mean I would like to go back inside and correct a problem." Grace immediately shook her head. "There is no point. They already made it clear how they feel." "Maybe," Ethan said calmly. "But I still think we should go inside." Grace looked down at Noah. The idea of walking back into that store made her stomach tighten. She could still feel the weight of those stairs and hear the manager's dismissive tone. Yet she also knew she had no formula at home after tonight. Reality left her with very few choices. "I do not want anyone paying my bills," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "That is not what this is." "Then what is it?" Grace asked. Ethan smiled slightly. "Call it a conversation." Before she could object again, he gently gestured toward the entrance. Just 5 minutes. Grace hesitated. Every instinct told her to avoid more embarrassment. But something in Ethan's voice felt steady and sincere. Finally, she stood up. 5 minutes, she said. That is all. Together they crossed the parking lot. The automatic doors opened once again. Several customers recognized Grace immediately. A few exchanged curious looks when they noticed the tall man walking beside her. Ethan appeared completely unconcerned by the attention. He moved through the store with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. At the checkout counter, the same cashier looked surprised. The manager stepped out from his office almost instantly. His expression darkened when he saw Grace return. I thought I told you to leave, he said. Grace opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan spoke first. Actually, I wanted to ask a few questions. The manager looked Ethan up and down. Ethan wore a simple dark coat and no visible signs of wealth. To the manager, he looked like just another customer. Questions about what? He asked impatiently. Ethan pointed toward the formula shelf. About how your store handles situations involving parents and infants. The manager folded his arms. We follow policy. People pay for products or they do not. Interesting, Ethan replied. And public humiliation is part of that policy? The manager's face tightened. Nobody humiliated anyone. A customer standing nearby glanced over. Another shopper slowed her cart. The conversation was beginning to attract attention. I watched the entire interaction, Ethan said. So did several other people. The manager laughed dismissively. Look, if she cannot afford something, that is not my responsibility. Grace felt her face warm again. She wished the conversation would end. Ethan, however, remained calm. You are correct, he said. Her finances are not your responsibility. The manager seemed pleased by the response. Exactly. But how employees treat customers is absolutely your responsibility. The manager's smile disappeared. For a moment, silence settled around the checkout area. Then the manager shrugged. I have a business to run. I cannot stop and listen to every sad story. Ethan studied him carefully. That is your final position? Yes, the manager replied confidently. And if you do not like it, you are welcome to shop somewhere else. Several customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Grace lowered her eyes. She expected Ethan to walk away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His expression never changed. Thank you, he said. That is exactly what I needed to hear. Then he tapped a number and raised the phone to his ear. Within seconds, someone answered. Ethan's voice remained calm and professional. Could you come to the Riverside location immediately? I believe we have an operational issue that requires attention. The manager rolled his eyes. Who exactly are you calling? Ethan ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Then he looked directly at the manager. Someone who has a very strong interest in how this store is being run. The manager let out a short laugh and looked around as if expecting others to share the joke. An operational issue? He repeated. Over a container of baby formula? Several customers remained near the checkout area, pretending to browse while listening. Grace shifted Noah gently in her arms and wished she could disappear. She had never liked being the center of attention. Ethan, however, appeared completely unfazed. This stopped being about formula a while ago, he said. The manager shook his head. Look, sir, I do not know who you think you are, but I have work to do. Ethan glanced toward the front entrance. That is fortunate. So does someone else. Less than 10 minutes later, a dark company vehicle pulled into the parking lot. Through the front windows, several employees noticed it arrive. The manager barely paid attention until two professionally dressed individuals entered the store and walked directly toward the checkout area. The moment the manager recognized one of them, the confidence on his face vanished. Mr. Reynolds? He said in surprise. The man approaching was the regional director responsible for dozens of locations across the state. Employees rarely saw him in person. "Good evening," Mr. Reynolds replied. His tone was polite but serious. Then he turned toward Ethan. "Sorry for the delay." Grace noticed something immediately. The regional director was not greeting Ethan like an ordinary customer. He was greeting him like someone important. Very important. "Not a problem," Ethan said. "Thank you for coming." The manager looked from one man to the other. Confusion quickly replaced irritation. "What is going on?" he asked. Mr. Reynolds answered before Ethan could speak. "That depends on how honest you plan to be." The manager blinked. "I do not understand." Mr. Reynolds folded his hands. "Mr. Caldwell informed me there was a concern involving customer treatment." Grace felt her breath catch. Caldwell. The name sounded familiar, though she could not immediately place it. The manager frowned. "Customer treatment?" Mr. Reynolds nodded. "Yes." The manager forced a nervous smile. "There must be some misunderstanding." Ethan remained silent. The regional director looked directly at the manager. "Then this should be easy to clarify." The manager launched into an explanation. He described policies, payment requirements, and store procedures. He carefully avoided mentioning his comments toward Grace. He spoke with growing confidence, apparently believing he had regained control of the situation. When he finally finished, Mr. Reynolds turned to Ethan. "Would you like to add anything?" Ethan nodded slightly. "Only one detail." Everyone waited. "I personally witnessed the interaction." The manager's expression tightened. "Sir, with respect, you only saw part of it." "No," Ethan replied calmly. "I saw all of it." Silence settled over the store. Then Mr. Reynolds spoke again. "Perhaps now is the appropriate time to explain something." He faced the manager. "Effective tomorrow morning, ownership of this entire chain officially transfers to Caldwell Retail Holdings." The manager stared blankly. "What does that have to do with anything?" Mr. Reynolds looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Everything." He motioned toward Ethan. "This is Ethan Caldwell." The manager's eyes widened. The color drained from his face. Several customers exchanged shocked looks. Even Grace froze. Suddenly she remembered where she had heard the name. Ethan Caldwell was the billionaire entrepreneur whose companies employed thousands of people across the country. Articles about his business acquisitions appeared regularly in financial news. Yet standing beside her in a simple coat, he looked nothing like the public image she had imagined. The manager struggled to find words. "You are Ethan Caldwell?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." The manager swallowed hard. "I had no idea." Ethan's expression remained calm. "That is not the issue." The manager glanced nervously toward Grace, then back to Ethan. For the first time that evening, he seemed to understand that the conversation was no longer under his control. And for the first time since leaving the store, Grace felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. The store became so quiet that even the soft hum of the refrigerators seemed loud. The manager stood frozen, staring at Ethan as though he hoped the entire situation would somehow disappear. Grace shifted Noah gently in her arms and watched the scene unfold. A few minutes earlier she had been sitting alone outside, worried about how she would feed her son. Now one of the most powerful businessmen in the country was standing a few feet away, calmly waiting for answers. Mr. Reynolds broke the silence first. "Would anyone here like to explain why a customer left this store feeling humiliated over a basic necessity for her child?" Nobody spoke. The cashier lowered her eyes. The manager cleared his throat. "I may have handled the situation poorly." Ethan looked at him. "Poorly?" The manager forced an uneasy smile. "I was following policy." Ethan shook his head. "Policy explains procedures. It does not explain a lack of respect." Several customers nodded quietly. One elderly woman near the checkout finally spoke. "I was here when it happened." Everyone turned toward her. That young mother was polite. "The entire time," she said. She was embarrassed enough already. Nobody needed to make it worse. Another customer agreed. She never caused a problem. She just needed a little time. The manager's expression grew increasingly uncomfortable. For the first time, he realized the issue was not simply a disagreement. Multiple people had witnessed what happened. Ethan remained calm, but his voice carried authority. Businesses exist to serve communities, he said. If someone cannot be treated with dignity during a difficult moment, then we have failed before we ever make a sale. Grace felt a lump form in her throat. Nobody had spoken up for her like this in a very long time. Mr. Reynolds turned toward the manager. Based on what has been reported and witnessed tonight, your conduct does not reflect the standards expected by this company. The manager immediately became defensive. You are making a decision over one incident. No, Ethan replied. We are making a decision based on character. The words landed heavily. The manager opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to argue. Mr. Reynolds nodded. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your management responsibilities pending formal review. The manager's shoulders dropped. He looked around the store, but nobody came to his defense. The consequences had arrived not because of a mistake at a cash register, but because of the way he chose to treat another human being. Ethan then turned toward the cashier. You are not responsible for management decisions. However, every employee has the ability to show kindness. Remember that. The cashier nodded quickly. I will. Ethan looked back at Mr. Reynolds. There is something else I want implemented. Name it. Mr. Reynolds replied. Beginning next month, every location will establish a community support program. Formula, diapers, baby supplies, and emergency essentials for families experiencing temporary hardship. Several employees exchanged surprised looks. Mr. Reynolds smiled. Consider it done. Ethan continued. No parent should feel ashamed for asking for a little time when their child needs food. Grace blinked rapidly as she fought back tears. She was not emotional because a wealthy man had intervened. She was emotional because someone had finally recognized her struggle without judging her for it. Mr. Reynolds walked to the shelf, retrieved the formula container, and handed it to Grace. This belongs with your son. Grace looked at it for a moment before accepting it carefully. Thank you, she said softly. Ethan smiled. You do not owe anyone gratitude for basic human decency. Noah suddenly let out a cheerful sound and reached toward the formula container, causing several people nearby to laugh. The tension that had filled the store began to fade. For the first time all evening, Grace felt her shoulders relax. Yet she had no idea that the most important conversation of the night had not happened yet. Because while others saw a struggling mother, Ethan Caldwell had begun to see something more. He saw determination, resilience, and quiet strength. And he was about to ask a question that would change the direction of Grace Miller's future. Most people expected Grace to react with excitement after everything that had happened. Instead, she stood quietly holding Noah and the container of formula, trying to process the whirlwind of the last hour. The customers gradually returned to their shopping, and employees began resuming their duties. Yet for Grace, the world still felt strangely unreal. Ethan glanced toward the front entrance. Would you mind if we talked for a few minutes? Grace hesitated before nodding. All right. A few moments later, they sat at a small table near the store's coffee station. Noah had settled down completely, and seemed content in his mother's arms. Ethan noticed the exhaustion in Grace's face. It was the kind of exhaustion that did not come from a single difficult day. It came from carrying responsibilities alone for a very long time. Tell me something, Ethan said. What were you doing before today? Grace smiled faintly. Trying to find a job. Before that. She looked down at Noah for a moment. Before he was born, I was studying accounting. I worked part-time while finishing school. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Accounting? Grace nodded. I had 1 year left. Before graduation. What happened? Ethan asked gently. Grace shrugged. Life happened. There was no bitterness in her voice. No attempt to blame anyone. Just a simple acknowledgement that circumstances had changed. Ethan appreciated that. Did you enjoy it? He asked. Very much. For the first time, a spark appeared in Grace's eyes. I like solving problems. Numbers made sense to me. They followed rules. Life does not always do that. Ethan smiled. That is true. Noah reached toward Ethan's wristwatch, fascinated by the reflection of the lights on the metal surface. Ethan let him touch it, causing the baby to giggle. Grace laughed softly. It was the first genuine laugh Ethan had heard from her all evening. He seems to approve of you, she said. I will take that as a compliment, Ethan replied. For a few seconds, silence settled comfortably between them. Then Ethan leaned back slightly. I have a question. Grace immediately looked cautious again. What kind of question? If someone offered you a financial gift right now, would you accept it? Grace answered so quickly that it almost made Ethan smile. No, why not? Ethan asked. Because gifts run out, she said. What happens after that? Ethan nodded slowly. The answer was exactly what he expected. Grace continued. Do not misunderstand me. I am grateful for what happened tonight. More grateful than I can explain. But I do not want Noah growing up believing the solution to every problem is waiting for someone wealthy to rescue us. Ethan studied her carefully. Many people in difficult situations focused only on immediate relief. Grace was focused on building something lasting. Then what do you want? He asked. She did not need time to think. A chance. Ethan folded his hands. A chance to do what? Work, she replied. Learn. Build a future. Earn stability. Her voice remained calm but firm. I do not need someone to carry me. I just need an opportunity to stand on my own feet. Ethan found himself genuinely impressed. Earlier that evening he had seen a struggling mother. Now he was beginning to understand the strength behind her quiet determination. She had every reason to ask for help. Instead, she was asking for responsibility. Ethan glanced toward Mr. Reynolds, who was reviewing documents near the front of the store. Then he looked back at Grace. Suppose such an opportunity existed, he said. Would you be willing to work very hard for it? Grace almost laughed. You clearly do not know much about single mothers. Ethan smiled. Fair point. I have been working hard every day, Grace continued. The problem is not effort. The problem is finding a door that will open. Ethan looked at Noah, then back at Grace. Maybe, he said thoughtfully. The right door has finally opened. Grace frowned slightly, unsure what he meant. But something in Ethan's expression told her this conversation was leading somewhere important. Somewhere either of them had expected when the evening began. Grace looked at Ethan carefully. During the past hour she had learned enough to know that he rarely spoke without purpose. When he mentioned an open door, he was not making small talk. What exactly are you suggesting? She asked. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Earlier you said you studied accounting? Grace nodded. Yes. And you enjoyed it? I did. Ethan glanced toward Mr. Reynolds, then back to her. One of our regional offices has an opening for an operations support assistant. The position involves inventory reports, financial tracking, scheduling, and administrative coordination. It is not a senior role, but it is a real opportunity with room to grow. Grace blinked several times. You are offering me a job? I am offering you an interview, Ethan corrected gently. You still need to earn the position. Surprisingly, that answer made Grace feel more comfortable. She had no interest in being handed something she did not deserve. What qualifications are required? She asked. Ethan smiled. That sounds exactly like a question someone serious about work would ask. Grace felt herself blush slightly. I am serious. I can tell. Ethan continued. The role requires organization, attention to detail, reliability, and the ability to learn quickly. Formal experience helps, but character matters too. Grace glanced down at Noah. There is one problem. Childcare, Ethan said immediately. Grace looked surprised. How did you know? Ethan laughed softly. Because every parent I have ever hired has mentioned it within the first 5 minutes. For the first time all evening, Grace felt a small sense of relief. Most jobs do not understand that reality. Some should, Ethan replied. The office partners with a childcare center located less than half a mile away. Employees receive assistance with enrollment costs. Grace stared at him. The opportunity sounded almost too good to be real. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Ethan considered the question. Because I believe talent is often overlooked when life becomes complicated. Grace remained silent. Ethan continued. You know what impressed me tonight? She shook her head. You never asked anyone to rescue you. You asked for time. Then you asked for opportunity. Grace looked away for a moment. Nobody had ever described her situation that way. Most people saw struggle and assumed weakness. Ethan seemed to see something different. I cannot promise anything, he said. You might interview and decide the role is not right for you. Or you might discover it is exactly what you have been searching for. Grace smiled faintly. And if I get the job? Ethan glanced at Noah. Then your son gets to grow up watching his mother build a future one step at a time. Those words affected Grace more than she expected. For months she had focused only on surviving the next day, the next bill, the next challenge. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to think beyond immediate problems. Mr. Reynolds approached the table carrying a business card. I have already spoken with the office manager, he said. If you are interested, they can meet with you Monday morning. Grace accepted the card carefully, as though it were something fragile. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, Mr. Reynolds replied with a smile. Save that for after the interview. Noah suddenly reached for the card, causing everyone to laugh. Ethan stood and adjusted his coat. I should get going. Grace rose as well. For a moment neither of them spoke. The entire evening had begun with embarrassment and uncertainty. Now it was ending with possibility. I do not know how to repay you, Grace said. Ethan shook his head. You do not owe me anything. Then he paused before adding, just promise me one thing. What is that? Grace asked. When life improves, remember this feeling. And if you ever meet someone standing where you stood tonight, offer them the same dignity you wanted for yourself. Grace nodded without hesitation. I promise. Ethan smiled. Good. Then I think this evening was worth it after all. As he walked toward the exit, Grace looked down at the business card in her hand. A few hours earlier she had been worried about finding enough money for baby formula. Now she was holding something far more valuable. Not charity. Not luck. A genuine chance to change the course of her life. 6 months later, Grace Miller stood in front of a conference room screen reviewing inventory reports for 3 regional districts. The woman reflected in the glass was almost unrecognizable from the exhausted mother who had once sat outside a convenience store wondering how she would feed her son. She was still the same person, but now there was confidence in her posture and purpose in her voice. The interview had led to a job. The job had led to training, long hours, new skills, and opportunities she had once believed were out of reach. None of it had been easy. She had worked early mornings and late evenings. She had studied after Noah fell asleep. She had asked questions, made mistakes, learned from them, and kept moving forward. Most importantly, she had earned every step. When the meeting ended, several coworkers congratulated her on a recent promotion. Grace thanked them and gathered her notes before checking the time. It was Friday afternoon, and she had somewhere important to be. 20 minutes later, she parked outside the same convenience store where everything had changed. The building looked familiar, but the atmosphere felt completely different. A large sign near the entrance announced the Community Family Support Program. Inside, shelves contained formula, diapers, baby wipes, and emergency supplies available for families facing temporary hardship. Grace smiled when she saw a Young mother speaking with an employee who was treating her with kindness and respect. That alone made the trip worthwhile. Noah, now older and full of energy, sat in a stroller happily pointing at everything around him. Grace pushed him through the entrance, and immediately noticed how different the store felt. Employees greeted customers warmly. Information about local assistance programs was displayed near the checkout area. The changes were not dramatic, but they mattered. Small acts of dignity often changed lives more than people realized. "Grace?" a familiar voice called. She turned and saw Mr. Reynolds approaching with a smile. "I heard you were stopping by today. I wanted to see the program in person," Grace replied. "It looks amazing. It is helping a lot of families," he said. "You would be proud of the impact." Grace looked around the store and nodded. "I already am." A few minutes later, another familiar figure entered through the front doors. Ethan Caldwell had spent the day visiting several locations and happened to be stopping by for a review. When he noticed Grace and Noah, a genuine smile appeared on his face. "Well," he said, walking over. "Look at you two." Noah immediately recognized him and waved excitedly. Ethan laughed and waved back. Grace could not help smiling. "He remembers people better than I do. That is probably a useful skill," Ethan replied. For a moment they stood together watching customers move through the store. Neither mentioned the difficult evening that had first brought them together. They did not need to. The results spoke for themselves. Ethan eventually glanced toward the support shelves. "You kept your promise." Grace followed his gaze. Earlier that month she had volunteered to help coordinate outreach efforts for struggling parents throughout the community. "I remembered what you said," she replied. "About offering dignity." Ethan nodded. "And?" Grace looked toward a young mother receiving assistance near the front counter. "You were right. Sometimes people do not need someone to save them. They just need someone to believe they deserve a chance." Ethan smiled quietly. "Exactly." Noah reached up toward his mother, and Grace lifted him into her arms. As she held her son, she realized how far they had come. The journey had started with uncertainty, embarrassment, and fear. It had continued through hard work, perseverance, and opportunity. Now it had become something else entirely, a future. Not because a billionaire had solved all her problems, but because one person had looked beyond her circumstances and recognized her potential. Grace met Ethan's eyes and smiled. "Thank you for opening that door." Ethan shook his head gently. "You walked through it." And as the afternoon sunlight streamed through the store windows, Grace knew that was the truth.